Welcome to the session on René Descartes. René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, was a gentleman scholar. Having born into a wealthy family, he received the best education possible at the time, first in the Jesuits College of La Flèche in Maine and later in Paris. After a period of service in the army, which enabled him to travel across Europe, Descartes settled in politically liberal Holland, where he wrote his most important works including Discourse on Method, published in 1637, Meditations in 1641 and Principles of Philosophy in 1646. The Latin name for Descartes being Cartesius, his works and thought are often referred to as Cartesian philosophy. Broadly, Descartes' contributions to philosophy can be classified under two heads. The first being a comprehensive physico-mathematical reductionism, and the second a conception of mind as lying outside the purview of physics, as a phenomenon whose nature could be grasped only from within, that is, via introspective reflection. In the former pursuit, he made some important mathematical discoveries such as analytical geometry, wherein he combined the principles of algebra with geometry and thus became a key figure in scientific circles. In the philosophic circles, he is more famous for the latter pursuit, the outcomes of which set the themes for further philosophical inquiry in the modern time, which still define the major problems of philosophy to be followed up, and the ambition and methodology of which characterized the turn to modernity in epistemology and philosophy at large. The Cartesian project. Descartes' contribution to science culminated with the publication of Discourse on Method in 1637, wherein he lays down the vision of science as a unified system which is based on secure metaphysical foundations. Although true to the scientific fervor characteristic of his times, he insists there on the importance of observation and experiment in deciding between rival hypotheses. He maintains that the fundamental axioms of the new science are to be uncovered simply by the innate powers of human intellect. I noticed certain laws which God has so established in nature, and of which he has implanted such notions in our minds that after adequate reflection we can't doubt that they are exactly observed in everything which exists or occurs in the world. He claims that this appeal to God as an implanter and in a certain sense guarantor of the relevant laws is what in fact forms the metaphysical foundation claimed, and consequently the Cartesian project in philosophy takes off from this ambition of placing a newly formulated scientific system on secure metaphysical foundations. The discourse itself outlines the route to such secure foundations proceeding from Descartes' celebrated method of doubt. The method of doubt. In the discourse, customary routes to knowledge such as the deliverances of the senses are rejected as unreliable, and instead a basis for certainty is sought in premises that cannot be shaken by any skeptical hypothesis, however extreme. There then follows what is probably Descartes' best known contribution to philosophy, the famous cogito argument, put thus: immediately I noticed that while I was trying thus to think everything false, it was necessary that I, who was thinking this, was something. And observing that this truth, I am thinking, therefore I exist, cogito ergo sum, was so firm and sure that all the most extravagant suppositions of the skeptics were incapable of shaking it. I decided that I could accept it without scruple as the first principle of philosophy I was seeking. An amplified form of these reflections are what forming the text of his metaphysical masterpiece, the Meditations on First Philosophy. Meditations. In the Meditations, Descartes lays down the philosophical procedure which characterized the modern approach. Admittedly, he was a devout Christian, but without abandoning his faith in his meditations, he turns to philosophy to answer all his questions, and in that endeavor he regards human mind as the instrument of knowledge and discoverer of truth. His method is radical and thoroughgoing. It starts with complete skepticism, but a methodological one, in the sense that, unlike other skeptics, instead of claiming that all knowledge is unreliable or impossible, he proposes to examine all his beliefs and their sources in order to test their validity and reliability. Should it happen that none of his beliefs were found to be trustworthy, then he would be justified in becoming a skeptic. But if his examination should present him with knowledge which could not be doubted, his method would lead him to truth. Furthermore, having discovered some indubitable truth, he could then use it as a criterion of truth, as a test of truth for other propositions. With these assurances, Descartes starts treading the path of a lonely meditator. The cogito argument. Having doubted the very existence of the world around him in the first meditation, using the fiction of a supremely powerful deceiver who employs all his cunning in order to deceive the meditator discovers one irrefutable certainty expressed in the second meditation. Thus, let him deceive as he can, he will never bring it about that I am nothing so long as I think that I am something. Thus, defeating all skepticism, the cogito argument comes into its culmination in the bold statement, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. Now, scrutinizing this one proposition which is true and which is known with absolute certainty, he lays bare a characterizing feature of the same, that is, it is intuited without any possible doubt, and it is distinctly set off over and against any other proposition. Since this is the feature which brings out the truth of the cogito, it can be used as a criterion for any truth. He then argues, clear and distinct ideas. True propositions are those which can be thought clearly and distinctly, asserts the meditator. And in the third meditation, from a reflection on the ideas found in his conscious self, the meditator identifies one idea, that of an infinite and perfect being, namely God, whose content so far exceeds his capacity that he could not have constructed it from his own resources. Having known himself as a doubting and uncertain being, the source of such an idea cannot be himself. Also, it cannot be the world either, for many things that could be found in the world are rather imperfect and could be improved further. Then the meditator reasons that such an idea should have been placed in my mind by God himself, as it were the mark of the craftsman impressed on his work, wherefrom it follows that the infinite being God really exists. The ontological proof of God's existence. A further proof of God's existence is later offered in the fifth meditation, based on the claim that existence is contained within the very definition or essence of a perfect being. This is Descartes' version of the so-called ontological argument, first formulated by St. Anselm. What is the reality of the idea of perfection? The meditator asks. First, it cannot contain any limitation, because a limitation could be a sign of imperfection. Second, it cannot be composed of parts, for partial dependence again is a defect. Now, if God is perfection, then he must be unlimited and his substance should be single, simple and infinite. As unlimited, uncomposed and infinite, God cannot be dependent upon anything else, whereas all things which are composite and finite stand in a relation of dependence to God. Then, as the perfect being so conceived, the idea of his existence should be contained among his necessary attributes. For to conceive of perfection and yet to conceive of it as non-existent is to conceive an impossible contradiction in terms. A non-existent perfection would not be perfect, hence God must exist. Thus, the concept of God includes his existence, just as triangularity includes the idea of three angles being equal to two right angles. The failure to see this is a mistake in logic, not a mistake in faith. Thus, it comes about that Descartes' investigations led him to prove logically the existence of a being who for other believers was but an object of faith. However, a logical foul cry is due at this juncture. If God is to be used to underwrite the reliability of mind's perceptions, how can we rely on the premises needed to prove his existence in the first place? This worry, known as the Cartesian circle, was first raised by Descartes' own contemporaries. Taking into account the whole of Cartesian argument, the logic of the issue is not so simple as it sounds. So, the debate on the same is still alive. One possibility of circumventing the issue would be to say that the entire argument which we have tried to trace is a seamless whole which constitutes an analysis that lays out the whole conceptual setting of logically related and mutually supporting concepts. Solid foundations for knowledge. Having established the existence of God, the meditator is able to reconstruct solid foundations for knowledge based on the mind's clear and distinct ideas whose reliability is guaranteed by God. This opens the possibility of full and certain knowledge both of God and other things whose nature is intellectual, and also concerning the whole of that nature which is the subject matter of pure mathematics. He claims that. Continuing with the project, now what is the epistemological status of the knowledge of the material world? This is the meditator's next concern. Status of the material world. Can we say that our knowledge of the material world is on the same epistemological footing as that of God and ourselves as minds and the clear and distinct ideas contained therein? The meditator answers to the affirmation, and just like the ontological argument cited, he has an ingenious reason for this too. We have perceptions and they must have a source. The source could be either ourselves or God or some third reality. It could not be ourselves because most perceptions persist no matter how hard we try to think them out of existence or deny their reality. They stubbornly intrude themselves on our experience and persist in their being. God could not be directly manifesting himself in external things because by now we know that God is no deceiver. If he were directly present in all these things, we would be aware of his presence in them, but we are not. So, God is not the source of our perceptions. Then the only remaining possibility must be true, namely the external world exists in its own right. Thus, the rational demonstration of what can be known is completed. The methodological doubt has paid off handsomely. Now comes perhaps the most controversial part of Descartes' meditation, which is rather metaphysical. Res cogitans and res extensa. In the sixth meditation, through splendid reasoning again, the meditator comes to the conclusion that the nature of the mind as a pure thinking substance or res cogitan is entirely distinct from the nature of body, which is extended substance or res extensa, and consequently concludes that it is certain that I am really distinct from the body and can exist without it. Thus, the meditator comes to the radical dualist stance that all material objects, including human bodies, have extension, that is, they exist in space, whereas mind has no existence in space, but has the essential property of thought, and thought has no extension. Interestingly, the celebrated mind body problem takes its formal birth at this turn of the thought adventure. The mind body problem. Granted that there are two metaphysically distinct substances, right, the thinking non-extended mind and the non-thinking extended matter, the question arises immediately that how do they interact, as they do pretty evidently in the human existence itself. It is obvious that bodily states, for example cold or hunger, do affect mental states. Conversely, thought leads to bodily action. If the two substances, the mental and the material, are fundamentally distinct, how can they interact? This is a so-called mind-body problem. Descartes was bothered by the problem and did attempt, but could not quite solve the problem. A critique of the project now. The meditations had been pre-circulated in manuscript to some of the leading philosophers of the day, and their critical comments together with Descartes' responses formed the 6 sets of objections and replies, which were included with the first edition. Along with the mind-body problem, as rightly pointed out in the objections, there is another important problem with Descartes' dualistic theory of mind and body. Granted that Descartes has managed to form some conception of himself as a conscious being without reference to the body, it remains to be shown that the conception so formed is logically complete and adequate, so that we can really have a coherent conception of the thinking self apart from any physical substrate. Evaluation. Whatever criticism may have accrued, the boldly self-confident endeavor of the meditator remains the timeless exemplar of the affirmative and optimistic use of reason in philosophy. It freed philosophy from the grip of scholasticism and paved way to a whole new series of thoughts responding to the problems it brought back to focus, thereby proclaiming the beginning of modern era in philosophy. In it, the rational demonstration of what can be known was conducted true to the spirit of the age of rising natural sciences, and that very exercise could re-establish the centrality of man in the cosmos and illustrate the fact that rational capacity of man was pivotal in all further progress of the mankind. Although the tenor of philosophy today is largely anti-Cartesian, Descartes' method and writings have exerted an enduring influence in shaping the post-Cartesian course of philosophy. It remains a fact that the framework of the mind-body problem is still very largely structured by the set of problems which Descartes uncovered about the nature of consciousness and its relation to the physical world. In spite of asserting the primacy of minds over bodies, Descartes had no doubt that we could get reliable knowledge about matter, since for him the essence of matter is extension, and since extension is an arrangement in space, to know the essence of material things is to study the mathematical relations governing those things. And evidently, the developments which have taken place in the physical sciences ever since endorse this valuable insight. Summary. Marking the dawn of modern era in philosophy, the Cartesian project in philosophy takes off from the ambition of placing the newly formulated scientific system on secure metaphysical foundations. As the reclusive meditations of a lonely meditator, he proposes to examine all his beliefs and their sources in order to test their validity and reliability. Starting with complete skepticism, but a methodological one, through systematic and thoroughgoing argument, defeating all skepticism, Descartes reaches one irrefutable certainty, the cogito, and establishes it as the bedrock of all knowledge. Now, from among the clear and distinct ideas found therein, he isolates one idea of a perfect being and, focusing around it, develops the ingenious argument for the existence of God. Having established the existence of God, the meditator is able to reconstruct solid foundations for knowledge based on the mind's clear and distinct ideas whose reliability is guaranteed by God. Then, arguing that the source of perceptions which are real cannot be ourselves or God, but should be the material world itself, as the only alternative, he establishes the reality of material world as well. Then a distinction is drawn between the nature of the mind as a pure thinking substance, or res cogitans, as entirely distinct from the nature of body, which is extended substance, or res extensa, paving way to the mind-body problem and allied issues. Now, here are some assignments. First, do you find the Cartesian project to be honest to the spirit of the scientific fervor characteristic of his time, especially when he bases the reliability of all knowledge on the existence of God? Another, I think therefore I am. Analyze this Cartesian proposition in the light of personal experience. And one more, do you agree with the Cartesian metaphysical dualism? If yes, how will you solve the mind-body problem? If no, what would be your alternative view? Elucidate. Now, some references. The philosophical writings of Descartes. It is a 3-volume set published in 1976, translated by John Cottingham. Another, Descartes by John Cottingham itself. And one more, The Cambridge Companion to Descartes, published in 1992 by Cambridge University Press. Thank you for watching this session. We will meet in another session with a newer topic. Till then, goodbye.